People think betrayal sounds like a door slamming, a glass breaking, a scream in the night. They're wrong. Real betrayal is quieter than that. It sounds like a phone call that ends too fast. It looks like a smile that disappears when you walk into the room. It feels like coming home to your own life and realizing somebody else has been living in it. My name is Ethan Parker, and for 12 years I believed I was building a life worth being proud of. I was the man who never stopped moving. The man who took every extra shift, every last-minute contract, every out-of-town assignment that promised a bigger paycheck and a better future. I told myself I was doing it for my family, for our house with the white porch railings and the maple tree in the front yard, for the woman I married when I was 28 and too in love to imagine a world where love could rot from the inside out, for the future we used to talk about in whispers after midnight when the bills were stacked on the kitchen counter and hope still felt stronger than fear. My wife's name was Claire. If you had seen her laughing in the early years, you would have believed in forever too. She had this soft, warm way of filling a room without trying. Blonde hair she used to tie up in a loose knot when she was cooking. Green eyes that could go from playful to serious in a second. A voice that always sounded like she had one foot in a memory and one foot in a dream. She was the kind of woman strangers trusted too quickly. The kind of woman who could make a grocery store run feel like a date. When I first met her at a friend's backyard barbecue in Raleigh, she was standing barefoot in the grass, holding a paper plate and laughing so hard at something somebody said that her whole body folded into it. I remember looking at her and feeling something sudden and reckless rise in me. Not attraction, not even desire. Recognition, like some part of me I didn't understand had just looked up and said, "There you are." She looked at me that night like I mattered before I had ever earned it. That kind of love can spoil a man. It spoiled me. I started believing effort and love were the same thing. That if I worked harder, worried harder, sacrificed harder, then nothing could touch us. I was wrong. Love needs presence. It needs time. It needs truth spoken in small rooms when nobody's watching. And for years, I kept offering money where I should have offered myself. My job pulled me away more every year. I worked logistics and industrial site management, the kind of work that never sounds glamorous because it isn't. It's hard hats, motel rooms, coffee gone cold in your truck, and long drives through towns that all start to blur into one another. Sometimes I'd be gone 4 days, sometimes 10. Sometimes 2 full weeks if a project went sideways. I lived out of overnight bags and gas station receipts. I told Claire every lonely mile meant something, that one day we'd look back and thank ourselves for this season. She would smile and say, "I know, Ethan. I know." And I believed her because believing her was easier than asking if love was thinning out between us. We had hired private security for our property after a break-in hit 2 homes in our neighborhood. Nothing dramatic happened to us directly, but Claire had gotten nervous staying alone when I was gone. The company sent a guard for rotating overnight checks at first, then a more regular arrangement after a few incidents nearby. That's how Darius Cole entered our lives. The first time I met him, he stood at the front gate with a flashlight clipped to his belt and a posture so still he looked carved out of something stronger than bone. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with calm eyes and the kind of voice that made you listen without realizing it. He was black, probably late 30s, maybe early 40s, always neat, always respectful, always saying yes sir and evening, ma'am in that low, steady tone that made him seem dependable. If I'm being honest, I liked him immediately. That's the kind of detail that still guts me. I liked the way he looked people in the eye. I liked that he checked the perimeter carefully and never acted lazy about the job. I liked that Claire said she felt safer when he was on duty. I remember clapping him on the shoulder once and saying, "Good to know somebody's looking out for this place when I'm on the road." He gave a small nod and said, "That's what I'm here for." I replayed those words in my head for months after everything fell apart. That's what I'm here for. For a long time, there was nothing obvious. No lipstick on a collar. No dramatic text message lighting up a screen in the dark. No perfume that wasn't hers. Real life isn't always generous enough to give you clean evidence. Sometimes it gives you pieces so small, you feel ashamed for even noticing them. Claire started changing in ways I could have called normal if I had wanted to stay blind. She began taking more interest in how she looked at home. Not out in public. Not for dinners, not for church, not for birthdays. At home. On random evenings when she said she was just tired and staying in. New silk robes, better perfume, lip gloss on nights when no one was supposedly coming over. She started keeping her phone face down. Not always. Just enough. When I called from job sites, sometimes she answered on the second ring like she'd been holding the phone. Other times it took too long. And when she did answer, her voice sounded strange. Breathless. Distracted. Like I had interrupted something she didn't want named. I asked her once, half laughing, "What are you doing over there, running laps around the house?" She laughed too quickly and said, "No, I was in the shower." Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. Suspicion is a cruel thing, because once it enters your mind, it starts rewriting the ordinary. A delayed answer becomes a signal. A changed routine becomes a threat. Silence becomes evidence. I fought it at first because I loved her, and because I knew what kind of man I did not want to become. I did not want to be jealous. I did not want to be paranoid. I did not want to look at the woman I married and start investigating her like a stranger. But love does not stay noble when it feels itself being replaced. The first crack widened on a Thursday night in September. I had driven 6 hours back from Charlotte after a project was delayed. I didn't tell Claire I was coming home early because I wanted to surprise her. We hadn't had a real weekend together in nearly a month, and the thought of walking through the door and seeing her face light up kept me awake the whole drive. It was close to 11 when I turned into our street. The house was mostly dark except for a lamp glowing in the master bedroom window. I remember feeling this wave of relief. Home, finally. Then I noticed Darius's vehicle in the side drive. That wasn't strange by itself. He was scheduled for late checks. What was strange was that the gate had already been secured, and his vehicle wasn't positioned near the front like usual. It was parked farther back, partly hidden, like it didn't want to be noticed from the street. I told myself I was overthinking. I parked quietly and came through the side entrance so I could surprise Claire in the kitchen. The house was silent. No television, no music, no running water. Just silence. And then, from upstairs, a sound I knew in an instant, before my mind allowed me to know it. A low laugh. A woman's laugh. Claire's. Followed by the unmistakable weight of a man's voice saying something too softly for me to catch. I froze with one hand still on my duffel bag. People talk about anger as heat. For me it was cold. It was ice poured into the center of my chest. Everything in me went still except my heartbeat, which slammed so hard it made the hallway tilt. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A security issue. A repair. A conversation. But deep down, deeper than hope, deeper than denial, there was a part of me that already knew. I walked up those stairs without hearing my own footsteps. The bedroom door was nearly closed. Not shut. Nearly enough to make a decent man hesitate. Enough to ruin a life. I pushed it open. There are moments the mind never files away properly. They don't become memories. They remain wounds. Claire was in our bed. Our bed. The bed we picked out together 8 years earlier, after saving for months because she wanted one that felt like a hotel but warmer. The bed where we whispered about baby names we never used. The bed where she held me when my father died. The bed where I had kissed her forehead 100 mornings and told myself I was the luckiest man in the world. She was in that bed with Darius. The lamp cast a soft yellow light over both of them, gentle as mercy, which somehow made it worse. There was no chaos in the room, no panic before I opened the door, no sign that this was a mistake made in madness. They looked like people who had settled into something already familiar. Claire saw me first. The color left her face so fast it was almost violent. Ethan, that was all she got out before Darius stood up. Even then, even in that moment, he didn't look wild or aggressive. He looked grim. Caught. Ashamed. Maybe. But not surprised enough. Not like a man terrified because something impossible had happened. He looked like a man facing the bill for choices he had already made too many times. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then, I heard myself laugh. I didn't mean to. It came out broken and sharp and nothing like me. I dropped my bag on the floor and said, "In my house?" My voice sounded far away. Claire started crying immediately. Not the kind of crying that comes from heartbreak. The kind that comes from consequence arriving in human form. "Ethan, please let me explain." "Explain what?" I looked at Darius. He held my gaze for about 1 second, then lowered it. That hurt almost as much as the sight itself, because respect now was useless. Respect after betrayal is just another insult. I said, "You, out." He nodded once, grabbed his clothes and moved with the careful slowness of a man walking through a field of explosives. When he passed me, he said, "I'm sorry." I turned so fast he stepped back. "Don't you dare," I said. "Don't you dare hand me that word like it means anything." He left without another sound. Then, it was just me and Claire and the wreckage of 12 years sitting between us like a body. She pulled the blanket around herself, shaking so hard her teeth nearly clicked. "Ethan, I never wanted you to find out like this." I stared at her. Of all the monstrous things a person can say, sometimes the worst is the accidental truth. Not "I never wanted to hurt you." Not "it meant nothing." Not "I'm sorry." I never wanted you to find out like this. Like this. As if there had been a better version of this. A kinder angle. A softer knife. I sat in the chair by the window because my legs suddenly didn't trust me. "How long?" She closed her eyes. "How long, Claire?" Her lips trembled. 6 months. Something inside me gave way so quietly I almost missed it. 6 months. Half a year of phone calls, kisses goodbye, grocery lists, anniversaries, ordinary mornings, ordinary lies. Half a year of me working out of town to pay for the life where she was making room for another man. I asked, was it every time I was gone? No. The answer came too fast. Which meant yes, or close enough to yes that the difference no longer mattered. I looked around the room, at our dresser, our pictures, our lamp, the book she kept by the bed, the framed photo from our trip to Savannah, and suddenly every object felt contaminated by secrecy. Why? That's the question everybody asks. Like betrayal has a clean answer waiting at the bottom. Claire cried harder. You were never here. I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. Never here? I said. I was work, I know. For us, I know. The way she shouted it back made the walls ring. We both fell silent. Then she said the thing I think she had been rehearsing in her mind for months. You were providing, Ethan, but you stopped being with me. You came home tired. You were always planning the next trip, the next payment, the next problem. I felt like I was living with your shadow. I laughed again, but there was no humor left in it. So you climbed into bed with the guard. Her face crumpled. It didn't start like that. That line. That tired, infamous line. As if beginnings excuse endings. I should have walked out right then. Maybe a stronger man would have. But pain makes you thirsty for every detail that can hurt you more. I hated that about myself in the months that followed. I hated how badly I needed to understand the exact shape of my own humiliation. How did it start? She looked at the floor. We talked. That's all at first. When he checked the property, sometimes he'd stay a minute if something spooked me. He listened. I nodded slowly. Of course, he listened. Not because listening is magic, but because neglect creates an echo, and the first person who speaks gently into that empty space sounds like salvation. She kept going, each word dragging through the room. You were gone so much. I was lonely. I know that sounds pathetic, but I was. He was there. He noticed when I was upset. He asked if I had eaten. He remembered things. Little things. I felt seen again. I looked at her and felt fury boil up through grief. Do you hear yourself? I know it's ugly. Ugly? I said, Claire. Ugly is a scratch on a car. Ugly is a bad haircut. This is rot. This is poison. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. I wanted to comfort her. That is the most humiliating truth I can tell you. I wanted to comfort the woman who had just broken me, because some part of love does not die on command. It keeps reaching toward the person who is hurting you, out of habit, out of history, out of hope that the person you loved is still in there somewhere beneath the ruin. But I didn't move. I asked the question that had already started eating me alive. Did you love him? She took too long to answer. Then she whispered, I don't know. That hurt more than if she had said yes, because I don't know means there was enough there to confuse her. Enough feeling to put my whole marriage on trial and still not come down on my side. I walked out of the room and drove until dawn. I don't remember the roads. I remember the steering wheel slippery under my hands. I remember pulling into a gas station and staring at the coffee machine like I had never seen one before. I remember standing in a bathroom under fluorescent lights and not recognizing my own face. Betrayal ages a man in a single night. It hollows him from the inside, then asks him to keep speaking in complete sentences. For 3 days I stayed in a motel 20 miles away. Claire called constantly. Voicemails, texts, apologies. Please, Ethan, please come home. Please let me explain better. Please don't throw our whole life away. I made one mistake. One mistake. Infidelity always wants to rename itself. Not an affair. A mistake. Not deception. A lonely moment. Not betrayal. Confusion. But 6 months is not a mistake. 6 months is a second life. When I finally answered, it was only because the silence had become its own kind of torture. She said, please come talk to me. So I did. Not because I was ready. Because I wasn't. I was still so angry my hands shook when I drove. But there are conversations you have because not having them would haunt you even more. When I got back, she looked smaller somehow, like grief had taken a bite out of her. She had no makeup on. Her eyes were swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept. For a second, seeing her like that almost pulled me backward into compassion. Then I remembered the bedroom. Compassion collapsed. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table where we had once celebrated tax refunds with cheap wine and take-out Chinese. Funny what becomes sacred in hindsight. I said, tell me everything. So she did. Not every detail. I stopped her before that. I didn't need pictures painted in my mind that would never leave. But I learned enough. It began with conversation. Then, with confessions. Then, one evening after too much rain, too much loneliness, too much emotional closeness dressed up as harmlessness, they crossed the line they had been approaching for weeks. After that, she said, it became easier. That sentence nearly finished me. After that, it became easier. Of course it did. Sin always does. The first lie chokes you. The 10th one sits comfortably in your mouth. I asked, "Did he ever come into this house when I was home?" "No." "Did the neighbors know?" "I don't think so." "Did anybody know?" She looked away. My sister suspected something. I closed my eyes. Of course somebody knew. Betrayal rarely stays private. It creates a silent audience. People who suspect. People who notice. People who look at you with pity while you keep smiling, unaware you're the last one to the funeral of your own dignity. I asked if she had ended it. She said no. Not before I found them. That was all I needed to hear. I moved into the guest room that night. Some people will judge that. Say I should have left immediately. Maybe. But when your name is on the deed, when your sweat paid for the walls, when the coffee mugs in the cabinet still carry the fingerprints of years, leaving doesn't feel simple. Sometimes the betrayed person clings to the house because it's the last witness who still remembers the truth. The weeks after discovery were the ugliest of my life. Claire wanted to fix it. Or said she did. She cried often. Cooked dinners I wouldn't touch. Left notes outside the guest room door. Asked if we could go to counseling. Asked if we could pray together. Asked if we could not let one terrible season erase all the good. But betrayal changes the temperature of every room. It makes ordinary domestic life feel absurd. How do you pass the salt to someone who has handed your heart to another person? How do you discuss utility bills with the same mouth you used to ask, "Who is he to you?" I became someone I didn't like. I checked records, scrolled through old messages, reviewed security schedules, counted dates, matched them against my travel calendar like an accountant auditing his own humiliation. Every blank space became a possibility. Every goodnight text from the road felt suddenly diseased in retrospect. I found deleted fragments she had missed. Nothing graphic. That almost made them worse. "Be careful tonight. He said he'd be late coming back. I miss your voice. Last night is still in my head." One message from Claire to Darius hit like a brick to the throat. I didn't know I could feel alive again. Alive. Again. As if loving me had become a kind of death. I confronted her with it. She broke down and said, "That wasn't about him being better than you." I stared at her. "Do you hear how impossible that sounds?" She cried and said, "I'm trying to tell you the truth." "No." I said, "You're trying to make the truth survivable. That's what remorse does. It edits. It softens. It tries to hand the betrayed person a version they can live with. But I did not want the softened version anymore. I wanted the truth hard enough to break my teeth. Darius was fired within days by the security company after I reported what happened. They apologized in stiff professional language that only deepened the insult. Policy violation. Breach of trust. Internal review. As if corporate phrasing could describe what it feels like to have another man's presence seep into the most private corners of your life. He tried to call me once. I didn't answer. He left one voicemail. "Mr. Parker, I know you don't owe me the time, but I need to say I'm sorry for what I did. You trusted me. You were decent to me. There's no excuse." I deleted it halfway through. Because maybe he meant it. Maybe he truly did. But remorse from the man who helped wreck your marriage feels like rain on a house that already burned down. My mother wanted me to leave Claire immediately. My brother wanted me to sue everyone who could be sued. My pastor wanted me to slow down and let pain speak before pride made permanent decisions. Everybody had advice. Nobody had to sleep in my skin. Claire started writing me letters because speaking face to face often ended with tears or silence or some shard of truth neither of us could hold properly. In those letters she told me things I wish she had said before any of this happened. She wrote that she had felt abandoned long before she felt unfaithful. She wrote that she hated herself for needing attention so badly. She wrote that every time I came home, she planned to end it, but then she would look at me tired, distracted, already mentally halfway to the next job, and tell herself there would be time later. She wrote that Darius made her feel wanted, but I had once made her feel cherished, and that she had been too weak and too selfish to tell me how desperately she missed that. I read every letter. Then, I put them back in the envelope and felt nothing but exhaustion. Because pain can understand explanation without granting forgiveness. One night, nearly a month after I found them, Claire knocked softly on the guest room door. I said, "What?" She asked if she could come in. I almost said no, but something in her voice sounded so stripped down, so free of strategy, that I let her. She stood there in the doorway, looking like a woman who had run out of ways to hide from herself. She said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I'm not saying it to manipulate you." I waited. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't think I ever stopped loving you," she said. "I think I stopped respecting what love requires." That line stayed with me, not because it repaired anything, because it was the first honest sentence that didn't sound rehearsed. I asked her, "Then why didn't you protect it?" She had no answer. And that, more than anything, is the center of betrayal. Not passion, not temptation, emptiness. A moment when someone chooses immediate comfort over sacred responsibility and has no explanation grand enough to dignify it afterward. Winter came early that year. The maple tree in our front yard turned red, then bare. The air sharpened. The house felt colder even with the heat on. Claire and I moved around each other carefully, like survivors in the same wreck trying not to touch exposed wires. People in town heard, of course. Small communities always do. A few people pretended not to know. A few offered clumsy sympathy. A few looked at me with curiosity thinly disguised as concern. Humiliation is not just pain. It is pain observed. I kept going to work. What else was I supposed to do? Men like me are taught to keep moving, to carry grief in the same hands that carry groceries, to answer emails while your chest is caving in, to show up, to keep the engine on because stillness might force you to hear yourself breaking. But on the road, alone in hotel rooms, I started seeing my own guilt more clearly too. No, I had not caused her affair. Let me say that plainly. A faithful person in pain speaks before they betray. What Claire did was her choice, her failure, her sin. But marriage isn't measured only by who lit the fire. It's also measured by who ignored the smoke. And I had ignored smoke for years. I thought responsibility was romance. I thought providing was intimacy. I thought exhaustion excused emotional absence. It doesn't. That realization did not make me forgive her. It made me grieve harder. Because now, I wasn't just mourning what she destroyed, I was mourning what I had neglected. By January, we started counseling. Not because reconciliation was guaranteed. Because truth needed somewhere to sit beside the floor of our house. Those sessions were brutal. I learned how long Claire had been lonely before she admitted it even to herself. She learned how deeply I equated usefulness with love, because I grew up watching my father work himself into silence. We unpacked childhood wounds, pride, communication failures, resentment, avoidance, emotional starvation, and the 1,000 unglamorous fractures that make a marriage vulnerable long before anybody else steps into the picture. Still, none of that changed the affair. Context is not absolution. A broken bridge is still broken, no matter how detailed the engineering report. The question everyone wanted answered was simple. Would I stay? I wish I could tell you the answer arrived like thunder. It didn't. It came slowly, miserably, over months, in pieces, Some days I looked at Claire and saw only betrayal. Other days I saw a deeply flawed woman sitting in the ashes of her own choices, and I remembered the girl barefoot in the grass at that barbecue all those years ago, laughing like joy was her native language. Some days I wanted revenge. Other days I wanted peace more than justice. Some days I imagined leaving, selling the house, starting over somewhere no one knew my name. Other days I thought maybe walking away would mean letting the worst thing she ever did become the truest thing about both of us. What finally changed me was not a grand apology.